Hello there and welcome. Today is Tuesday, April 11th, and this is VOA's International Edition. I'm Lori London in Washington. Coming up, tensions rise over U.S. airstrikes in Syria as the U.S. Secretary of State heads to Moscow.
The real failure here has been Russia's failure to live up to its commitments under the chemical weapons agreements that were entered into in 2013.
Growing outrage after the viral video of a man physically removed from a U.S. airplane.
My God, what are you doing?
VOA's International Edition continues now. Well, video of a man being dragged out of a United Airlines flight in Chicago has gone viral. According to the airline, the Sunday flight from Chicago to Louisville, Kentucky was overbooked, so the flight crew asked passengers to voluntarily take another flight. No one did volunteer, so the airline randomly chose 4 people. Witnesses say one man refused, saying he was a doctor who needed to get home so he could see his patients the next morning. But police then came on board and dragged him off the plane as other passengers watched in disbelief.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! No! Guys, my God! What are you doing? No, this is wrong! Oh my God! Look at what you did to him! Oh my God!
Well, the CEO of United Airlines posted a statement on Twitter apologizing for having to reaccommodate the customers. He also said his team is moving with a sense of urgency to work with the authorities and conduct a detailed review of what happened. Joining me now to discuss this is Dallas aviation attorney Will Angelley. It really looked very upsetting to the other passengers. It looked like the man had a bloody lip from banging his head against the armrest, too.
I think it was. You could hear from some of the audio from the passengers. You know, he wouldn't go, and they did physically just drag his body down the aisle. I'm sure that's extraordinarily upsetting. You know, we do not live in a police state. That seemed for all the world to be what that looked like on video.
As someone who is an aviation attorney, was this even legal for them to do?
It's an interesting question because the federal aviation regulations, they allow for overbooking. And it's 14 CFR 250 is the provisions that address this, and they say that you have to provide immediate compensation. But they speak in terms of if you're involuntarily denied boarding, which is interesting. And if you're involuntarily denied boarding, then you're entitled to receive a certain amount of compensation that's set forth here. And then the airline has to write a set of rules that basically follow the regulations. And United has that same set of rules, and it mocks that same language. If you're involuntarily denied boarding, if you just look at those words, that means that all of this is handled at the gate prior to anyone being allowed down the jet bridge and onto the plane.
But he boarded. They allowed him to board.
He had already boarded. He was in his seat. There's nothing in either the regulations or United's rules that says that we can physically restrain and remove you from an airplane after you have already taken your seat. And in doing so, use physical force and some level of physical violence to do that. There's absolutely nothing in the regulations that gives them that sort of authority.
And the fact that they didn't want to remove him from the seat because they were overbooked at that point, they wanted to remove him so they could put their own staff in. Yeah. So that seems very convoluted.
It does seem very convoluted. The other part of the regulation is that, if you're a passenger and you're a fare-paying passenger, you have certain rights. If you're a zero fare-paying passenger, which is what the regulations, talk about that in, which is, like an award, a miles award sort of thing, your rights aren't as great. They can bump you more easily. But from what I've been able to ascertain, this man was a fare-paying passenger who was rightfully in his seat. They took 4 employees of the airline who are never fare-paying passengers. They ride for free. And so these people were not fare-paying passengers, and so they were trying to bump a fare-paying passenger for an employee of the airline who wasn't paying any fare and make room for that person.
Would you expect a lawsuit to be inevitable?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Do you think this is, an open and shut case, so to speak?
No case is open and shut, but it's. I think the man has a very strong case. I guess. I don't really see a justifiable reason that this got as out of hand as it did. I think United was wrong to handle it the way that they handled it. There, probably 15 better ways to handle it. If he decides to pursue some sort of recourse against the airline, he would have he'd have a good case.
And there's also been a lot of criticism of how the CEO of United Airlines responded in the statement that he made. What was your view on how he handled that?
It was a weak statement. Basically he said something to the effect of, he was deeply upset by having to reaccommodate the passengers aboard the flight. Well, this was not a reaccommodation of passengers aboard the flight. This was, one could argue this was an assault of a fare-paying passenger to physically remove him from a plane so, we can get 4 of our employees to Kentucky so that they can catch flights in the morning. I mean, there's no justification for that. So I think it was a weak statement, to be sure.
All right. We appreciate your perspective. Dallas-based aviation attorney Will Angelley.